Hello, everybody. Ketshi1380 with Ketshi Gaming, coming with part 4 of my Tears of the Kingdom review slash commentation of the game. Sort of the fourth and last part, I wanted to go over God Hand and the Zonai devices. While doing so, I am showcasing my lumbering, terrible ideas that I had for my own monster of a vehicle. Anyways, for Tears of the Kingdom, I would say God Hand and the Zonai devices are the major pull and attraction of this game and became the main feature. With multiple ideas ranging from the neat but impractical all the way to the bland but very useful. Or in my case, just impractical. So let's start with the God Hand ability. And it is extremely clear that they definitely borrowed the Magnesis ability from Breath of the Wild and expanded upon it while taking some aspects away from it. So God Hand doesn't have the same range or speed as the Magnesis. It doesn't also have that same sort of whippiness that you see with Magnesis either. And it's not very viable in some instances of taking on enemies. Unlike Breath of the Wild, where you could actually use a giant metal rock to take on a Lionel and win. Now, it still can be utilized in combat. Not as much as Magnesis. You can still pick things up and then drop them on top of them, like rocks or explosive barrels, for instance. But its main function is definitely to put the various objects you can combine together, particularly the Zonai devices. Which leads me to the Zonai devices themselves. Some of them are practical, others not so much. Like the hydrant. Outside of the water temple, I don't think I used them, and maybe the occasional shrine where they were included. Just never used them. I mean, yes, you can use them to water flowers and soak down the Zora throughout the whole entire kingdom, but they weren't exactly all that useful outside of specific shrines or even the water temple dungeon. And once you finish that, their usefulness greatly diminishes. But with that in mind, the other devices, some of them have more uses than others. And it's very apparent that they are supposed to be meant for exploration and combat. Although when it comes to exploration, one vehicle sort of configuration sort of dominates them all, and that's the bike. Or I should say the air bike. There have been other attempts at various other vehicles, particularly land vehicles that can handle the rough terrain. It takes a lot of parts to get those put together, and you only have so many connection points. And this is just really, really simple. A bit of a pain in the butt to get the connections right so that it doesn't wobble or steer to the left or right when it comes to that particular configuration. There's also what they call the Goblin Glider, which I've had more success with in terms of keeping it straight. Don't get me wrong, you can do some really neat things with these parts. But just in terms of practical sense, yeah, some of these are kind of complicated, but just aren't all that great. They're slow and clunky. And again, I go with what works instead of making something convoluted and complicated. Then there's a bit of another aspect to the Zonai devices and putting them together in vehicles. You can make various combat sort of related creations. Some you can control like you see on my monstrous amalgamation that you see on the screen, but others you can make sort of what they call drones, where it fires automatically and will seek out various targets by itself. The biggest problem with the drones in particular is when you start getting past blue enemies, such as black and particular silver in this case, it takes a lot of firepower from these Zonai devices, similar to the weapons, to actually just get them to function and work against the enemies. It takes like 20 something beam cannons to down a Lionel in a timely manner, if that's any indication of the firepower or lack thereof. Now, other Zonai devices like the flame emitters or the shock emitters do a little bit better job because they run away or are stunned from being shocked. It still takes a bit of time for them to actually down an enemy, though. On top of that, one of the more annoying aspects of using the God Hand is getting it to place whatever you want onto whatever object you want. Sometimes you'll have it centered right where you want, but for whatever reason it shifts it one way or another and it's not where you want to place it. It's more of an annoyance than an inconvenience, to be honest. Especially with the build command that you have, you can easily just put anything you did assemble back together. Now, I will kind of reiterate that yes, these weapons that you can build are good against weaker enemies, but when you start getting into that black and silver, like I said before, you see diminishing returns, like greatly. You take one of the what you would consider probably the most powerful weapons, a cannon, and you keep seeing it shoot, and it does absolutely nothing. And they can potentially destroy your own vehicle when you do that as well by using those cannons, so you have to be careful with how many you use, and they use a considerable amount of power. So they're just a little bit impractical. I mean, so do the beam emitters, but at least they kill things faster than the cannons do. Now, one of the neater aspects is that, yes, these are not invincible, and some of these points that you connect can actually break due to stresses. As a former physics major, this is just absolutely neat to me. I mean, it doesn't quite follow some of the principles or laws of physics, like a lack of momentum. Lighter objects should spin faster and thus hit harder. I mean, you can also combine that with mass, but faster, lighter things should hit pretty hard in comparison, but they don't quite. It's clearly based off of mass and not how velocity of the object spinning. Don't get me wrong, that's just a nitpick. There's tons of calculations I'm sure it's doing per second in order to get that to work, and it's actually just amazing that they managed to get it to work on a Switch. So with that, let's switch to the map, which I wanted to cover in a little bit more detail, not too much in comparison to my part 1 video where people were accusing them of recycling assets, which yes, that happens in game development all the time. Although the map has a very similar layout, it definitely is significantly changed in comparison to Breath of the Wild. I mean, just go out to the Gerudo Desert. I mean, the canyon that leads to it is now a river, and it's full of quicksand now. It's not just a bland desert with nothing but sand. There's actually stuff going on. And some of these pools you can go into actually have secret caverns underneath. And like I said, there's tons of nooks and crannies everywhere on this map now. And finding some of the shrines has you exploring all over the place, thinking you found it, only to find that the nook and cranny that you're in just isn't the right one. You have to keep searching. It adds to the exploration and in some cases puzzle solving on how to get to the shrine. On top of that, you basically have what are 3 separate maps, that being the Sky Archipelago, Hyrule proper, and then you have the depths below. I mean, the depths are a touch bland, a little bit on the samey side. I mean, there's a few highlights here and there, like underneath Elden Volcano. And I will admit there are parts of Hyrule that feel like they didn't really do much with it. For instance, let's take Eastern Hyrule out by where the Advanced Robot Lab was, or I should say just Advanced Lab. Not much has changed out there, to be honest. There might be a few pieces of island here and there, but otherwise it's still relatively intact. Yes, they probably could have done more with it, but they didn't. And it felt like they focused on the more hostile areas in the game. Like Elden Volcano is now more hospitable to Hylians, with far less lava everywhere. So the last thing I wanted to touch on is the music, which I find to be the most disappointing part of the game. Outside of combat and maybe Hyrule Castle, it's actually pretty boring, and they went with the same light piano music with maybe a little bit of few instrument that I really can't tell because it's not really all that particularly loud. And it feels like they could have done more with the music than they did. And I hope they incorporate more symphonic like they did in the past. Or even, I don't know, go to a hybrid route like Halo did with its symphonic rock. Anything other than just the bland piano music they have tinkling in the background. Anyways, this will be the end of my Zelda review and commentary. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. And please leave a comment. What do you think of my terrible idea of a device? I should have made this out of metal. If I ever do like a follow-up to it, I'm going to try and make it out of metal. Anyways, thank you again for watching. Have a good one.